Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Success. Brandon Walsh stood on the 42nd floor of his Manhattan office, gazing down at the city that had made him rich beyond his wildest dreams. At 45, he commanded an empire built from nothing, a network of luxury hotels across the East Coast that had transformed him from a small-town construction worker into one of New York's most formidable businessmen. The scar running along his left forearm served as a permanent reminder of his humble beginnings. 20 years ago, he'd been laying concrete foundations in brutal summer heat, dreaming of something greater. Now, his calloused hands signed contracts worth millions, and his steel-gray eyes had earned him a reputation as a man who never forgot a favor or a slight. "Mr. Walsh," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mrs. Walsh is here to see you." Brandon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Crystal rarely visited his office unless she wanted something expensive. Their marriage had become a carefully choreographed dance of mutual tolerance, sustained by his wealth and her stunning beauty. She'd been a cocktail waitress at his first hotel when they met, blonde, ambitious, and 22 to his 32. Now, at 37, she maintained her appearance with the dedication of a professional athlete, though the warmth in her blue eyes had long since faded. Crystal glided into his office wearing a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her smile was perfect, practiced, and as cold as winter morning. "Darling," she purred, kissing his cheek with lips that felt like ice. "I have wonderful news. Amber finally found the perfect house." Their 20-year-old daughter had been house hunting for months, supposedly preparing for her independence after college. Brandon had indulged this search, hoping it might mature her beyond the spoiled princess Crystal had raised her to be. "Where?" Brandon asked, settling behind his mahogany desk. "The Hamptons. It's absolutely perfect. 6 bedrooms, oceanfront, with a private beach. The seller is motivated, but they want cash. $7 million. Brandon studied his wife's face, noting the barely contained excitement she tried to mask as maternal concern. Something felt wrong. Amber had never shown interest in property investment before, preferring shopping sprees and social media to substantive pursuits. "That's quite a leap from starter home to Hampton's estate," he said carefully. Crystal's laugh tinkled like broken glass. "Our daughter deserves the best. Besides, it's an investment. Property values there only go up." Brandon had built his fortune on reading people, understanding their motivations, their weaknesses. Crystal's tells were subtle but familiar. The slight dilation of her pupils when she lied, the way her manicured fingers drummed against her purse when she was nervous. "I'll need to see the property first," he said. "Oh, but the seller needs an answer by Friday. These Hamptons properties don't stay on the market long." Her voice carried a hint of desperation poorly disguised as urgency. Brandon leaned back in his leather chair, studying the woman he'd shared a bed with for 15 years. She'd given him one child and taken everything he'd offered, but lately, he'd sensed a distance growing between them that went beyond their usual emotional coolness. $7 million is a significant sum, even for us. "Brandon, please. Think of Amber's future. This could set her up for life." The way she said Amber's name carried an odd weight, as if she were playing a card she expected to win the game. Brandon had learned long ago that when someone invoked family to justify a financial decision, they were usually lying about their true motivations. "I'll consider it," he said finally. Crystal's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Of course, but don't take too long, darling. Opportunities like this don't wait." After she left, Brandon sat in the gathering dusk of his office, watching the city lights flicker to life below. His instincts, honed by years of cutthroat business dealings, screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with Crystal's sudden real estate urgency. He picked up his phone and dialed his private investigator, a former NYPD detective named Rico Valdez who'd helped him navigate various business complications over the years. "Rico, it's Brandon. I need you to look into something for me." Quietly. Chapter 2. Shadows and Secrets. Rico Valdez had been tracking cheating spouses and corporate espionage for 12 years since leaving the force. But Brandon Walsh's case felt different. The man who'd hired him wasn't some insecure husband looking for confirmation of his worst fears. Brandon was a predator sensing prey. 3 days of surveillance revealed a pattern that made Rico's blood run cold. Crystal Walsh wasn't just having an affair. She was orchestrating something far more elaborate. The man was Troy Hendricks, 38, a failed real estate developer who'd filed bankruptcy twice in the past decade. Handsome in a weathered, dangerous way, with the kind of smile that convinced women to ignore red flags. He and Crystal met twice daily, once at a downtown cafe, once at a motel on the outskirts of the city where they conducted business that looked nothing like romance. Rico had photographed them poring over documents, making phone calls, and meeting with a third party that made his investigator instinct scream warnings. Vincent "Vinny" Torino, a known associate of several crime families who specialized in money laundering and identity theft. The most damning evidence came from a parabolic microphone recording outside the motel room. Crystal's voice, stripped of its usual honey-sweet tone, revealed a woman Rico barely recognized. "The stupid bastard will hand over the money if we play this right," she'd said, laughing with cruel satisfaction. 15 years of playing the devoted wife, and it all pays off this weekend. Troy's response chilled Rico to the bone. And the daughter's really on board with this? Amber hates him almost as much as I do. She thinks he's a controlling monster who's suffocated us both. Besides, she gets half the money, and we all disappear together. New identities, new lives, far away from Brandon's reach. You sure he won't suspect? Please. The man thinks he's bought my loyalty with jewelry and credit cards. He has no idea I've been planning this for 3 years. Rico delivered his report to Brandon on Friday morning, watching his client's face transform from suspicious concern to something far more dangerous. The man who'd built an empire through ruthless determination didn't even blink as he reviewed the photographs and transcripts. They're planning to take the money and run, Rico concluded. Probably this weekend, based on their conversations. They've got new identities lined up, offshore accounts prepared. This is an amateur hour, Mr. Walsh. They've been planning this meticulously. Brandon set down the photos with steady hands, but Rico caught the slight tremor in his voice when he spoke. My daughter, she's meeting them tonight. From what I can tell, your wife's convinced her that you're emotionally abusive, that you control them through money. Amber believes she's helping her mother escape an oppressive marriage. The silence that followed felt like the moments before an explosion. Brandon stared out his office window, and Rico saw something shifting behind those steel gray eyes, something primal and unforgiving. They want $7 million, Brandon said finally. They'll get exactly what they deserve. Rico had seen that look before, in interrogation rooms with suspects who'd pushed too far past the line of human decency. Mr. Walsh, whatever you're thinking, I need you to do something else for me. Rico, can you arrange for a large bag to be filled with something that looks like cash bundles from a distance? What kind of something? Brandon's smile was the coldest thing Rico had ever seen. Newspaper, cut to size, wrapped in genuine $100 bills on the outside of each bundle. Maybe $200,000 in real money spread throughout, just enough to feel authentic. That's not illegal, and I need you to install cameras in my daughter's apartment. Every room. I want to record everything that happens when they discover what's really in that bag. Rico felt a chill crawl up his spine. He'd worked for men who destroyed lives in boardrooms and back alleys. But Brandon Walsh was planning something that went beyond simple revenge. Mr. Walsh, maybe you should consider calling the police. What they're planning is fraud, theft. Brandon's laugh contained no humor whatsoever. The police would arrest them, they'd serve a few years, and then they'd be free to try again. No, Rico. Some betrayals require a more permanent solution. As Rico left the office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed the moment a dangerous man decided to become something far worse. Chapter 3. The Perfect Trap. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only autumn in New York could provide. Brandon stood in his daughter's apartment, watching Amber's nervous energy as she fidgeted with the expensive safe he'd bought her for her 20th birthday, a safe that was about to become the center of his carefully orchestrated revenge. "Are you sure about this, Daddy?" Amber asked, her voice carrying the same manipulative sweetness her mother had perfected. "I mean, keeping that much cash here seems risky." Brandon studied his daughter's face, seeing Crystal's features reflected in her bone structure, but also recognizing his own steel-gray eyes. Those eyes that had once looked at him with genuine affection now held something calculated and cold. The realization that his own child had been turned against him sent a rage through his system that he struggled to contain. "The bank won't be open until Monday, sweetheart. The seller needs cash by Sunday evening, or they're walking away from a deal. Sometimes we have to take calculated risks to secure our future." The irony of his words wasn't lost on him. Amber was indeed securing her future, just not the one she imagined. He placed the heavy duffel bag into the safe, noting how Amber's eyes tracked its movement with barely concealed greed. Rico's team had done excellent work. The bag felt authentic, weighed properly, and even had the slight chemical smell of genuine currency. $6 million, Brandon said, making his voice sound appropriately anxious. "Everything we've saved for your future, Amber. I trust you to keep it safe." She hugged him then, and for a moment, Brandon felt a flicker of the love he'd once held for his little girl. But her embrace felt rehearsed, calculated, another performance in the elaborate play his wife had choreographed. "I won't let you down, Daddy." "I know you won't," he replied, and in a way that was absolutely true. After leaving Amber's apartment, Brandon drove to his private estate in Westchester, where Rico was waiting with final preparations. Hidden cameras now monitored every angle of Amber's apartment, streaming live footage to servers that Rico assured him were completely untraceable. "They're moving tonight," Rico reported. "My sources say they've got a charter flight leaving from Teterboro at midnight, heading for the Cayman Islands. From there, they disappear into new identities." Brandon nodded, settling into his home office where multiple screens showed him different angles of his daughter's empty apartment. "And the other arrangements?" "Everything's in place. The moment they discover what's really in that bag, they'll have a choice to make. Either they run with 200,000 and try to rebuild their lives, or they come back for real money and walk into the trap I've prepared." Rico shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Walsh, I have to ask, how far are you planning to take this?" Brandon's smile was razor-sharp, far enough to ensure they never betray anyone again. As evening fell, the cameras showed Crystal arriving at Amber's apartment with Troy in tow. Brandon watched his wife's performance with detached fascination as she hugged their daughter and spoke in animated whispers about their impending freedom. Troy looked exactly like the kind of man who convinced wealthy women to abandon their marriages. Charming, confident, and radiating the dangerous appeal of someone unbound by conventional morality. He was also, according to Rico's research, a man with significant gambling debts and connections to people who collected those debts with extreme prejudice. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Amber's voice came through the hidden microphones clearly. "I mean, Daddy's been good to us." "Good to us." Crystal's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Sweetheart, your father is a controlling monster who's kept us trapped in a golden cage for 15 years. Tonight, we finally get our freedom." Brandon watched Troy nod encouragingly, his arms sliding around Crystal's waist with possessive familiarity. The casual intimacy of their body language suggested their affair had been going on for far longer than Rico's 3-day surveillance had revealed. "Besides," Crystal continued, "we're not stealing anything. I've earned this money through 15 years of playing the perfect wife to a man who treats me like an expensive accessory." The words hit Brandon like physical blows, not because they hurt, but because they revealed the depth of his wife's self-deception. She genuinely believed she was entitled to his life's work because she'd managed to maintain her beauty and smile at dinner parties. At 11:30 p.m., they made their move. Brandon watched through the cameras as they opened the safe with shaking hands, removed the heavy duffel bag, and hurried toward the waiting car that would take them to their charter flight. In exactly 12 hours, they would discover the truth about what they'd stolen. And then, Brandon's real revenge would begin. Chapter 4. The Discovery. The luxury suite in Georgetown, Cayman Islands, cost $8,000 per night, but Troy Hendricks felt like a king as he carried the duffel bag across the marble floor. Crystal sprawled across the king-sized bed in a silk negligee, while Amber stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the turquoise Caribbean waters. "I can't believe we actually did it," Amber whispered, her voice filled with exhilarated disbelief. "I keep expecting Daddy to burst through the door." Crystal's laugh was intoxicating with freedom. "Your father has no idea where we are, sweetheart. By the time he realizes we're gone, we'll have new names, new lives, and enough money to disappear forever." Troy set the bag on the marble coffee table with ceremonial reverence. $6 million. Split 3 ways, that's $2 million each, enough to live like royalty for the rest of our lives. The moment felt sacred, triumphant. They'd escaped Brandon Walsh's control, outsmarted one of New York's most ruthless businessmen, and claimed their prize. Crystal's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the zipper. "To our new lives," she said, pulling the zipper back to reveal newspaper. Bundles and bundles of newspaper, cut to the exact size of currency and wrapped with genuine $100 bills on the outside. Crystal's hands dove deeper into the bag, frantically searching for real money, finding only more newspaper and a single envelope tucked between the fake bundles. "What the hell?" Troy snatched the bag, dumping its contents across the coffee table. Real money scattered among the newspaper. Maybe $200,000 total, barely enough to cover their escape expenses. Amber's scream echoed through the suite. "No, no, no. This can't be right. You put $6 million in that safe." Crystal tore open the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note in Brandon's familiar, precise script. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice my wife's sudden interest in real estate? Or my daughter's newfound affection? The money you tried to steal represents 20 years of my blood, sweat, and sacrifice. You wanted to betray me? Let's see how you handle the consequences. You have 48 hours to return to New York and face me. If you run, I will find you. If you hide, I will drag you out. There is nowhere on this earth you can go that my reach won't follow. The choice is yours. Come back and accept your punishment, or spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders. You taught me that family means nothing. Now let me teach you what that really costs." Brandon. The photograph showed the 3 of them at the airport, taken just hours earlier. But it wasn't the image that made Crystal's blood turn to ice. It was the red circles drawn around each of their faces, and the handwritten notation in the corner. "Vincent Torino sends his regards." Troy went white as a sheet. What does he know about Vinny? "Who's Vincent Torino?" Amber demanded, but the terror in Troy's eyes told her everything she needed to know. Crystal sank onto the bed, the full scope of their situation crashing down on her like a collapsing building. Brandon hadn't just anticipated their betrayal. He'd orchestrated their downfall. Every step they'd taken, every plan they'd made, he'd been 3 moves ahead. "We have to run," Troy said, his earlier confidence evaporating. "We take the 200,000 and disappear. Change our names, go somewhere he can't find us." "You don't understand," Crystal whispered, her voice hollow with defeat. "There is nowhere he can't find us. Brandon doesn't just have money. He has connections, resources, people who owe him favors, and others who fear him." Amber collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "What have we done? What have we done?" Outside their suite, the tropical paradise that had seemed like freedom an hour ago now felt like a beautiful prison. Brandon Walsh had given them a choice, but Crystal understood the truth. They were already caught in a trap that had been 20 years in the making. The only question now was whether they would walk back into his web willingly or be dragged back to face whatever punishment he'd designed for their betrayal. Chapter 5. The Hunt Begins. Brandon's private jet touched down at Cayman Islands International Airport 18 hours after Crystal and Troy's discovery. He stepped onto the tarmac wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars, his steel-gray eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses that reflected the Caribbean sun like mirrors. Rico emerged from the plane behind him, carrying a briefcase and wearing the grim expression of a man who'd seen where Brandon's revenge was heading. The past 24 hours had transformed his employer from a betrayed husband into something far more dangerous, a predator who'd tasted blood and found he liked it. "They're still in the hotel," Rico reported as they settled into the waiting black sedan. "My sources say they've been arguing for hours. The girl wants to come home and beg for forgiveness. The wife wants to run. The boyfriend's caught between his gambling debts and his fear of you." Brandon's smile held no warmth. Fear is a useful emotion. It clarifies priorities. The sedan glided through Georgetown's narrow streets, past colonial buildings painted in cheerful pastels that seemed to mock the darkness of Brandon's intentions. He'd spent the flight planning the next phase of his revenge, making phone calls to associates who owed him favors, setting wheels in motion that would give his betrayers exactly the choices they deserved. "Vincent Torino's people are already on the island," Rico continued reluctantly. "They arrived this morning. Whatever arrangement you made with him." "Vincent understands business," Brandon interrupted. "Troy owes him $3 million in gambling debts. I've offered to cover those debts in exchange for services. Everyone wins." Rico had worked for dangerous men before, but Brandon's casual mention of covering $3 million in crime family debts sent chills through him. The man who'd hired him to investigate a cheating wife had revealed himself to be something far more lethal. And if they choose to run instead of coming back to New York? Brandon's reflection in the sedan window looked like a predator evaluating prey. Then they'll learn that some hunts are more entertaining than others. At the hotel, Vincent Torino's men had taken positions throughout the building, not to harm Crystal, Troy, and Amber, but to ensure they understood the scope of their situation. Every exit was watched, every escape route monitored. The luxury suite that had felt like paradise yesterday now served as an elegant prison. Brandon entered the hotel lobby like a conquering emperor returning to claim his territory. The staff, alerted to his arrival by generous advance payments, treated him with the reverence reserved for men who could buy and sell their establishment without checking their bank balance. He settled into the penthouse suite directly above the room where his wife, daughter, and their accomplice were trapped, then sent a simple message through the hotel's internal phone system. "Room service is on its way." 30 minutes later, a hotel attendant knocked on Crystal's door with a silver cart carrying their lunch, but instead of food, the covered dishes contained photographs. Pictures of Vincent Torino's men positioned throughout the hotel. Images of Troy's mounting gambling debts and the brutal methods used to collect them. Documentation of Amber's credit cards being canceled, her trust fund frozen, her entire financial existence erased with a few phone calls. And at the bottom of the cart, a single bottle of champagne with another note. "Congratulations on your new freedom. Since you're no longer my family, you're no longer under my protection." Vincent's men are very interested in collecting Troy's debts. "The Cayman authorities have been informed that your passports were reported stolen. And as of this morning, every asset connected to the Walsh name has been legally transferred to charitable foundations. You wanted independence? You have it. Every comfort you've enjoyed, every security you've taken for granted, every safety net that protected you, gone. You have until sunset to decide. Come upstairs and discuss terms for your return to New York, or find out how the world treats people who have nothing and no one to protect them. The choice is still yours. For now, B." Crystal read the note 3 times before the full implication sank in. Brandon hadn't just anticipated their betrayal. He'd used it as an excuse to strip away every comfort, every protection, every advantage their marriage had provided. They weren't just financially ruined. They were completely vulnerable. "He's upstairs," Amber whispered, pointing toward the ceiling. "He's right above us." Troy paced the suite like a caged animal, his earlier confidence replaced by the desperate energy of a man realizing he'd underestimated his opponent. "We could still run, take the money we have, and go where?" Crystal's voice carried the hollow tone of someone watching their world collapse. "He's right. We have nothing without him. No money, no protection, no future." Outside their window, the Caribbean sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, marking the deadline Brandon had set. In a few hours, they would have to choose: surrender to his mercy or discover exactly how merciless the world could be to people who'd lost everything. The hunt was just beginning. Chapter 6: The Terms of Surrender. As the Caribbean sun sank toward the horizon, painting the hotel suite in shades of gold and crimson, Crystal Walsh faced a choice that would define the rest of her life. Troy sat slumped in a chair by the window, his face ashen with the realization that Vincent Torino's men weren't just watching, they were waiting. Amber curled on the bed, sobbing into a pillow that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The phone rang at exactly sunset. Mrs. Walsh. The voice belonged to a hotel concierge, speaking with the practiced neutrality of someone paid to deliver uncomfortable messages. Mr. Walsh requests your presence in the penthouse suite. All three of you. Immediately. Crystal's hands shook as she hung up the phone. For 15 years, she'd played the role of devoted wife while secretly planning her escape. Now, faced with the consequences of her betrayal, she realized how thoroughly she'd underestimated the man she'd married. "We have to go," she whispered. Troy's laugh held the edge of hysteria. "Go up there? Are you insane? He'll kill us. If we don't go up there, Vincent's men will do worse than kill us. At least with Brandon, we know what we're dealing with." They rode the elevator to the penthouse in silence, each lost in their own private terror. When the doors opened, they found Brandon standing on the suite's private balcony, his silhouette framed against the darkening Caribbean sky. He didn't turn around when they entered. "Close the door behind you," he said, his voice carrying the same calm authority he used in business meetings. "Sit down. We have things to discuss." The penthouse suite was 3 times the size of their room, with panoramic windows and furnishings that spoke of wealth beyond imagination. But what made Crystal's blood freeze was the man sitting in the corner, Vincent Torino, whose reputation for violence was legendary even among New York's criminal elite. "Vincent," Brandon said without turning around, "I believe you know Mr. Hendricks." Troy went white as paper. "Mr. Torino, I can explain." "Nothing to explain," Vincent replied in a voice like gravel. "You owe money. You got caught stealing money. Math is simple." Brandon finally turned to face them, and Crystal saw something in his eyes that made her want to run screaming from the room. This wasn't the man she'd married, or even the ruthless businessman who'd built his empire through calculated aggression. This was something far more dangerous, a predator who'd been betrayed by his own pack. "Sit," he repeated. They obeyed like trained animals. 15 years, Brandon began, his voice conversational. 15 years of marriage, Crystal. 15 years of providing you with everything you could want. A beautiful home, financial security, social status, respect. And this is how you repay me. "Brandon, please," Crystal started. "I'm not finished." His voice cut through her words like a blade. "And you, Amber. 20 years of love, protection, education, opportunity. I've given you every advantage life can offer. This is your gratitude." Amber's sobbing intensified, but Brandon showed no mercy. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued. "Crystal, you're going to sign divorce papers that leave you with nothing. No alimony, no property settlement, no claims to any asset connected to my name. You'll walk away with exactly what you brought to this marriage. Nothing." Crystal opened her mouth to protest, but Brandon held up a hand. "Amber, your trust fund is gone. Your credit cards are canceled. Your college tuition stops immediately. If you want to finish your education, you'll work for it like everyone else. Daddy, please. I'm not your daddy anymore. Family doesn't betray family. Since you've chosen not to be my family, you no longer get the benefits of that relationship." Troy found his voice, desperation making him brave. "And me?" Brandon smiled, and Vincent chuckled darkly from the corner. "You, Troy, have $3 million in gambling debts." Vincent's been very patient, but patience has limits. "However, I made him an offer. I'll cover your debts, all of them, in exchange for your services." "What kind of services?" "The kind that ensure Crystal and Amber understand the permanent nature of consequences." "You wanted to steal from me? Fine. Now you work for me. Indefinitely." The trap's final jaw was closing, and Crystal could see their complete destruction mapped out before them. Brandon hadn't just anticipated their betrayal. He'd used it to design a punishment more brutal than anything legal justice could provide. "You can't do this," Crystal whispered. Brandon's laugh was the coldest sound she'd ever heard. "I can do whatever I want. You taught me that love is worthless, that family is meaningless, that loyalty can be bought and sold. Congratulations, you've created a monster." Outside the penthouse windows, the Caribbean night had fallen completely, and with it, any hope of escape. Brandon Walsh had given them their choices, and now they would live with the consequences forever. Chapter 7. The Price of Betrayal. 6 months later, Crystal Walsh, now Crystal Henderson, having been forced to take her maiden name, stood in the cramped kitchen of a studio apartment in Queens, staring at a stack of bills she couldn't pay. The manicured hands that had once worn $20,000 jewelry now bore calluses from her job at a discount clothing store, where she earned in a week what she used to spend on a single lunch. The divorce had been swift and merciless. Brandon's lawyers, armed with evidence of her adultery and theft attempt, had destroyed her in court. The judge, clearly influenced by Brandon's reputation and connections, had granted him everything while leaving her with nothing, not even the right to use his name. Her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror showed a woman who'd aged years and months. The stress of poverty, the humiliation of her circumstances, and the constant fear of Vincent Torino's men had carved lines around her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. The designer clothes were long gone, sold to pay for basic necessities. The worst part wasn't the financial destruction, it was the isolation. Every friend from her previous life had abandoned her the moment Brandon made it clear that maintaining relationships with his ex-wife would be inadvisable. The social circle that had once revolved around her wealth and status treated her like a contagious disease. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a number she'd learned to dread. "Rent inspection tomorrow. Don't be late." Management. Management was Troy, and this wasn't really about rent inspection. 3 blocks away, in a warehouse that Vincent Torino used for various business purposes, Troy Hendricks sat across from Brandon Walsh, reviewing reports that detailed every aspect of Crystal and Amber's new lives. The man who'd once charmed wealthy women now looked like a beaten dog, his expensive clothes replaced by off-the-rack suits, and his confident smile replaced by permanent anxiety. "Crystal's behind on rent again," Troy reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's working 60 hours a week, but it's barely enough to cover basic expenses." Brandon nodded, making notes in a leather-bound journal. "And Amber dropped out of college after 3 weeks. She's working at a fast food restaurant, living in a shared apartment with 3 roommates. She cries herself to sleep most nights." "Good." Brandon's voice held no emotion. "Continue monitoring them. I want to know every struggle, every humiliation, every moment they realize what they've lost." Troy's hands shook slightly as he turned the page in his report. 6 months of working for Brandon had shown him depths of cruelty he'd never imagined. The man didn't just want revenge. He wanted to watch his betrayers suffer slowly, completely, permanently. "Mr. Walsh, they've learned their lesson. Maybe it's time to what?" Brandon's steel-gray eyes fixed on Troy with predatory intensity. "Show mercy? Forgive and forget?" They had 15 and 20 years respectively to appreciate what they had. Instead, they chose to betray the man who gave them everything. Vincent, who'd been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. "Kid's got a point, Brandon. How long you planning to keep this up?" Brandon's smile was razor-sharp. "As long as it takes for them to understand that actions have consequences. They wanted independence? They have it. They wanted freedom from my control? They got it. Now they get to experience what life is like without my protection, my money, my influence." Troy cleared his throat nervously. "Crystal's been asking about reconciliation. She wrote you a letter." Brandon held out his hand, and Troy produced a handwritten note on cheap stationery. Crystal's once elegant penmanship was shaky now, desperate. "Brandon, I know I have no right to ask for anything after what I did, but I'm begging you, not for myself, but for Amber. She's so young, and this life is destroying her. I'll accept any punishment you want to give me, but please don't let our daughter suffer for my mistakes. I was wrong about everything. I was selfish, greedy, and stupid. You gave me a beautiful life, and I threw it away for a fantasy. Please, if you ever love me at all, show mercy to our daughter. Crystal. Brandon read the letter twice, then held it to the flame of a nearby candle, watching it burn to ash. Funny, he said, watching the paper blacken and curl. She calls Amber our daughter now. 6 months ago, she was turning my own child against me. Now that they're both suffering, suddenly she remembers family bonds. Troy and Vincent exchanged glances. Both men had seen Brandon's ruthless business practices, but this level of calculated cruelty was something new. The thing about consequences, Brandon continued, is that they have to be permanent to be meaningful. If I show mercy now, what lesson does that teach? That betrayal is acceptable as long as you apologize afterward? That family bonds only matter when you need something? He stood and walked to the warehouse window, looking out at the city that had made him rich and powerful. They made their choice. Now, they live with it. Forever. Outside in the Queen's apartment, Crystal opened her laptop and began typing another letter she knew would never be answered. While 20 blocks away, Amber stared at her reflection in the employee bathroom of a fast food restaurant, wondering how her life had become so small. The price of betrayal, they were learning, was higher than either of them had ever imagined. Chapter 8. The Final Gambit. 1 year after their failed betrayal, Amber Walsh, now calling herself Amber Henderson to avoid the shame associated with her father's name, sat in a 24-hour laundromat in Queens, watching their single load of clothes tumble in the ancient machine. Her mother dozed fitfully in a plastic chair, exhaustion etched into every line of her once beautiful face. The past 12 months had stripped away every comfort, every security, every assumption about how the world worked. They'd learned that poverty wasn't just about lacking money. It was about being invisible, powerless, and constantly afraid. Crystal's carefully maintained beauty had crumbled under the stress of working multiple low-wage jobs, while Amber's college dreams had evaporated into the harsh reality of survival. But something had changed in Amber over the past few weeks. The crushing despair that had defined her existence was slowly being replaced by something harder, more focused, rage. "Mom," she said quietly, watching Crystal stir in her sleep. "I've been thinking." Crystal opened tired eyes that held none of their former sparkle. "About what, sweetheart?" "About fighting back." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Crystal sat up straighter, sudden alertness replacing her exhaustion. "Amber, no. Whatever you're thinking, he's not God," Amber interrupted, her voice carrying a strength that surprised them both. "He's just a man with money and connections. And every man has weaknesses." Crystal looked around the empty laundromat nervously, as if Brandon's surveillance network extended even here. Over the past year, they'd learned that privacy was another luxury they could no longer afford. Troy's monthly inspection, "He destroyed us completely," Crystal whispered. "We have nothing left to fight with." "We have the truth," Amber said. "And we have something he doesn't expect, the willingness to lose everything because we already have." That night, in their studio apartment, Amber revealed the plan she'd been developing for weeks. It was desperate, dangerous, and probably suicidal, but it was also the first real hope either of them had felt since their Caribbean imprisonment. "Vincent Torino," Amber explained, spreading newspaper clippings across their small table. "He's not Dad's friend. He's his business partner. And according to these articles, he's been under FBI investigation for 3 years." Crystal studied the newspaper reports with growing understanding. "You think Vincent's cooperation with your father is illegal?" "I think Dad's been laundering money through his hotel business for years. And I think Vincent has evidence that could put him in prison for the rest of his life." The plan was elegantly simple. Approach Vincent directly, offer him information about Brandon's private accounts and business practices, and convince him that destroying Brandon would be more profitable than maintaining their partnership. It was also essentially a suicide mission. "Vincent Torino doesn't negotiate with amateurs," Crystal said. "He kills them." "Maybe," Amber replied. "But we're not amateurs anymore. We're women with nothing left to lose, which makes us the most dangerous kind of enemy. Crystal saw something in her daughter's eyes that reminded her of Brandon at his most ruthless, a complete absence of fear when facing impossible odds. The year of poverty and humiliation had burned away Amber's softness, leaving something harder and more focused behind. Even if Vincent listens to us, even if he turns against your father, what makes you think he won't kill us afterward? Amber's smile was cold enough to make Crystal shiver. Because I'm not going to make Mom's mistake. I'm not going to underestimate our opponent or overestimate our own cleverness. I'm going to give Vincent exactly what he wants most, the complete destruction of Brandon Walsh, and make sure he needs us alive to get it. 3 days later, Amber walked into Vincent Torino's social club in Little Italy, carrying a briefcase she'd bought with their last $50 and wearing the only business outfit she owned. The men at the front door tried to turn her away, but she spoke 7 words that guaranteed Vincent's attention. I'm Brandon Walsh's daughter. We need to talk. 20 minutes later, she sat across from the most dangerous man in New York, laying out a proposal that would either destroy her father completely or get her killed in the process. You want to betray the man who betrayed you, Vincent said after hearing her pitch. I respect that. But what makes you think I won't just tell Brandon about this meeting? Amber opened her briefcase and removed a single photograph. Brandon and Vincent shaking hands outside a construction site, with bundles of cash visible on the table between them. Because I have documentation of every dirty deal you've made together for the past 5 years. If something happens to me or my mother, copies of this evidence go to the FBI, the IRS, and the New York Times. Vincent's smile was genuinely impressed. You're more like your father than you know, kid. I'm nothing like him, Amber replied. He destroys people because he can. I'm destroying him because I have to. The game was about to change, and Brandon Walsh had no idea that his greatest mistake wasn't underestimating his enemies. It was creating them in the first place. Chapter 9. Reckoning. The FBI raid on Brandon Walsh's Manhattan headquarters began at dawn, with federal agents swarming through his 42nd floor offices like an army of ants. Brandon sat behind his mahogany desk, hands folded calmly, watching them tear apart the empire he'd spent 20 years building. Special Agent Sarah Chun, the lead investigator, approached his desk with a warrant that represented 3 years of investigation and 1 devastating betrayal. Brandon Walsh, you're under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy. Brandon's steel-gray eyes remained steady as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. I assume Vincent Torino is enjoying his immunity deal. Mr. Torino has been very cooperative, Agent Chun replied. Amazing how quickly criminal partnerships dissolve when one partner becomes more valuable as a witness. What Brandon didn't know, what Vincent had been careful not to reveal, was that the evidence package hadn't come from Vincent's files. It had come from Amber, who'd spent the past 6 months working as Vincent's inside source, documenting every illegal transaction, every money transfer, every piece of evidence needed to destroy her father completely. As federal agents led Brandon through the lobby of his own building, past gawking employees and news cameras, he caught sight of a familiar figure standing across the street. Amber stood beside a black sedan, no longer the broken girl who'd fled to the Caribbean a year ago, but a woman who'd learned to weaponize her own destruction. Their eyes met through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time in over a year, Brandon Walsh felt something approaching respect for his daughter. She'd done what he'd never believed possible. She'd outplayed him. 6 hours later, in federal lockup, Brandon received his first and only visitor. Crystal sat across from him in the visiting room, looking healthier than she had in months. The stress lines around her eyes had softened, and she wore clothes that fit properly for the first time since their divorce. Vincent's taking care of us, she said without preamble. New identities, relocation assistance, enough money to start over. Turns out, cooperating with federal investigations pays better than stealing from husbands. Brandon studied the woman he'd married 15 years ago, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. You planned this from the beginning. No, Crystal replied. Amber planned this. I just followed her lead. Amazing how much your daughter learned from watching you destroy your enemies. And Troy. Crystal's smile held genuine warmth for the first time in years. Troy's dead. Vincent didn't appreciate being used as a pawn in someone else's game. Turns out, betraying multiple crime families is bad for your health. Brandon absorbed this information without emotion. Troy had been a weak link from the beginning, too greedy and too stupid to survive in a world of professional predators. The insurance money alone will keep us comfortable for years, Crystal continued. Plus the federal witness protection stipend, plus Vincent's gratitude payments. We'll never be wealthy again, but we'll never be poor either. And Amber's decided she likes the investigation business. Agent Shin thinks she has a natural talent for it. Something about understanding how criminals think. The irony wasn't lost on Brandon. His daughter had inherited his strategic mind and ruthless determination, then used both to destroy him completely. In a strange way, he was proud of her. One question, he said. The money you tried to steal. You knew it was fake from the beginning, didn't you? Crystal's laugh was genuine and unguarded. We suspected, but Amber convinced Vincent that the real crime wasn't theft. It was that you'd underestimated us. That made him angry enough to listen to our real proposal. Brandon leaned back in his chair, finally understanding the scope of his defeat. They hadn't tried to steal his money. They'd used his own arrogance as bait to trap him in a federal investigation that had been building for years. The bag of newspaper was never about the money, he realized. It was about making me angry enough to reveal my connections to Vincent. Angry people make mistakes, Crystal agreed. And you've been making them for a year, thinking you were punishing us while actually documenting your crimes for federal investigators. As visiting hours ended and Crystal prepared to leave, Brandon felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Complete defeat. Not the temporary setback of a failed business deal, but the absolute destruction of everything he'd built. Any regrets? He asked. Crystal paused at the door, considering the question seriously. I regret the 15 years I wasted being afraid of you. I regret teaching our daughter to fear your anger instead of learning from your methods. But betraying you? No regrets at all. That night, alone in his cell, Brandon Walsh stared at the ceiling and contemplated the elegant perfection of his destruction. His wife and daughter had learned from his own playbook, then used his teachings to orchestrate his downfall. They'd outthought him, outplanned him, and out-ruthlessly executed him. In the end, his greatest weakness hadn't been trusting the wrong people. It had been underestimating the people he'd taught to be just as ruthless as he was. The student had become the master, and the master had learned that in a world without loyalty, even family bonds could be weaponized by those clever enough to forge them. Brandon's empire was gone, his freedom was gone, and his family had disappeared into new identities funded by his enemies. But as he drifted toward sleep in his federal cell, Brandon Walsh found himself smiling. After all, it took a special kind of talent to raise a daughter capable of destroying him so completely. He'd taught her well. Epilogue. 2 years later, FBI Special Agent Amber Chun, her new identity, honoring the agent who'd helped orchestrate her father's downfall, stood in a Manhattan courtroom as the judge sentenced Brandon Walsh to 25 years in federal prison. He looked older, grayer, but his steel-gray eyes still held their predatory intelligence. When the sentence was read, he looked directly at her and nodded once, a gesture of respect between professionals. Crystal, now living quietly in Portland under a new name, ran a small boutique that specialized in helping women rebuild their lives after divorce. She'd found peace in helping others escape the kinds of traps she'd once lived in. Vincent Torino served 18 months in minimum security prison and retired to Florida, where he spent his days fishing and telling stories about the one time he'd been outsmarted by a 20-year-old girl who'd learned strategy from her father and applied it better than he ever had. And Brandon Walsh, the man who'd taught his family that betrayal was unforgivable, discovered that the most perfect revenge was being destroyed by the very lessons he'd taught his enemies. In the end, the price of betrayal wasn't paid by those who'd been betrayed. It was paid by the man who'd made betrayal into an art form, only to discover that his greatest masterpiece was his own destruction. The game was over, and for the first time in her life, Amber Walsh had won. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Hello, and welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're grateful for each view and comment. Tell us, from which country or city are you watching today? We enjoy connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Beneath the Surface. Dominic Harlow stared at the reflection in his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. 10 years of marriage had taught him patience. 10 years of secrets had taught him caution. Dumb. We're going to be late. Veronica's voice carried from downstairs, tinged with that familiar edge of irritation she no longer bothered to hide. He smiled thinly at his reflection. Coming, dear. At 42, Dominic didn't look like much. Average height, slightly thinning brown hair, and a physique that suggested a desk job and occasional weekend jogs. Nothing about him screamed success or power. And that was precisely how he wanted it. Veronica waited by the door, checking her phone. At 38, she remained strikingly beautiful. Long blonde hair, expertly maintained figure, and the kind of polished appearance that came from regular spa treatments and designer clothes. Treatments and clothes that Dominic supposedly couldn't afford. Finally, she muttered, not looking up from her screen. I told Skylar we'd be there by 7. Dominic nodded, opening the door for her. Wouldn't want to keep your sister waiting. The drive to the restaurant was silent. Dominic watched Veronica from the corner of his eye as she texted rapidly, a small smile playing at her lips. He knew who she was texting. He knew everything. 5 years ago, Dominic had nearly confronted her when he first discovered the affair. But then he realized the value of patience. Instead of exposing what he knew, he began constructing something far more intricate. A long game where every humiliation, every betrayal, every mocking comment was cataloged, measured, and would eventually be repaid. To the world, to Veronica, her family, even his own brother, Dominic was a failed entrepreneur, a man who couldn't hold on to success, who lived off his wife's family connections for the occasional consulting job. The reality was something else entirely. Beneath the unremarkable exterior lived a man with extraordinary talents. Before meeting Veronica, Dominic had worked in specialized security operations for clients whose names never appeared in public records. He had skills in information gathering, behavioral analysis, and tactical planning that would make most intelligence agencies take notice. But he had walked away from that life when he fell in love with Veronica Tate, the dazzling marketing executive from a respected Boston family. When they married, he had promised himself to be just Dominic Harlow, loving husband, potential father, average American man. That promise had died slowly, bled dry by Veronica's gradual contempt, her family's condescension, and the shocking betrayal of his own brother, Perry, who had aligned himself with the Tate's assessment that Dominic was, fundamentally, a disappointment. As they pulled into the upscale restaurant's parking lot, Dominic spotted Skylar's Mercedes already there, alongside Perry's Audi. He also noted a black SUV with tinted windows parked discreetly in the far corner. Right on time. Remember to smile, Veronica said, applying fresh lipstick. It's our anniversary, after all. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Dominic replied, his voice betraying nothing of what was to come. The maitre d' led them to a private dining area where Skylar, Perry, and Skylar's husband Abbott were already seated, cocktails in hand. The happy couple arrives, Skylar announced, her smile not reaching her eyes. At 40, Skylar was Veronica's older sister and constant critic, a woman who measured success exclusively in possessions and appearances. Perry, Dominic's younger brother by 4 years, stood to give him an insincere hug. Hey, big brother. 10 years, huh? Who would have thought? Not me, muttered Abbott into his whiskey, earning a sharp look from Skylar. Dominic accepted a glass of champagne, raising it slightly. To family, he said, his gaze sweeping across the table. And to getting exactly what we deserve. He noticed how Veronica kept checking her phone under the table, how Skylar and Perry exchanged knowing glances, how the empty chair at their table seemed to mock the celebration. The chair meant for the final guest, someone none of them was expecting. When Veronica excused herself to use the restroom, Dominic checked his watch. In exactly 17 minutes, everything would change. 10 years of playing the long game was about to pay off. He smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. Chapter 2. The Dinner. So, Dom, any exciting business prospects on the horizon? Abbott asked, swirling his third scotch. Unlike the others, Abbott's condescension stemmed from simple insecurity rather than malice. As Skylar's husband, he was merely parroting his wife's attitudes. Nothing worth mentioning, Dominic replied with practiced humility. Still consulting on a few projects. Skylar snorted delicately. Consulting. Is that what they call unemployment these days? Veronica returned, her face slightly flushed. Dominic noted the fresh lipstick, the subtle adjustment of her dress, the quick check of her phone. The restaurant bathroom was her regular rendezvous point. Predictable. Amateur. Did I miss anything? She asked brightly. Just discussing Dom's illustrious career, Perry said, raising his glass in mock toast. The betrayal of his own brother still cut deepest. Once close, Perry had slowly distanced himself as Dominic's public persona became that of a failure. Blood, apparently, wasn't thicker than social standing in the Harlow family. Let's not ruin dinner with that conversation, Veronica said with a tight smile. It's supposed to be a celebration. Of what exactly? Skylar pressed, leaning forward. 10 years of supporting a man who can't support himself? I'm surprised you've stuck it out this long, Ronnie. Well, I always did like projects, Veronica replied, avoiding Dominic's gaze. The waiter arrived with their appetizers, momentarily pausing the humiliation. Dominic checked his watch again. 8 minutes. Remember when Dom thought he was going to revolutionize home security systems? Perry laughed, turning to the others. Invested every penny, and then the company folded in 18 months. That venture had been deliberately sabotaged by Dominic himself. A necessary step in appearing to be a failure while he built something far more valuable in the shadows. Or that consulting firm he tried to start, Skylar added. What was it called again? Harlow Insights. Lasted all of a year. You have to admire his persistence, Abbott offered, which might have been kind if not for his patronizing tone. Dominic simply nodded, accepting each barb with apparent resignation. The waitress approached with their main courses, giving him a discreet nod as she placed his plate before him. Right on schedule. At our anniversary dinner, my wife's sister said, he's still broke? Surprised you haven't left him. My wife laughed, give it time. My own brother nodded. Yeah, he's a real disappointment. I felt numb. The table went quiet, all eyes turning to Dominic, who had spoken these words while calmly cutting his steak. What did you just say? Veronica asked, her knuckles white around her fork. Just recounting tonight's highlights, Dominic replied mildly. For posterity. God, you're pathetic, Skylar muttered. Ronnie, seriously, when are you going to? But then, Dominic continued, his voice still calm as he checked his watch one final time. My waitress leaned in and whispered, Sir, your other guest is here. As if on cue, the waitress appeared beside their table. Sir, your other guest is here, she said, her words identical to what Dominic had just predicted. Veronica's smile vanished as she saw who walked in, and the whole restaurant went silent. A tall man in an impeccably tailored suit entered, followed by two others who positioned themselves discreetly by the entrance. The man walked directly to their table, his presence commanding immediate attention. Mr. Harlow, he said with a slight nod to Dominic. Everything is prepared. Thank you, Vincent, Dominic replied, rising to shake the man's hand. Please join us. We were just celebrating my 10-year anniversary. Vincent pulled up a chair between Dominic and Veronica. A decade of patience. Impressive. Who the hell is this? Perry demanded, his confident facade cracking slightly. This is Vincent Reeves, Dominic said, as if introducing an old friend. He's my business partner. Business partner? Veronica repeated, her voice barely audible. What business? Dominic smiled. The business I've been building for the past 7 years while you've been sleeping with Leonard Russo? The color drained from Veronica's face. Skylar's hand flew to her mouth. Perry shifted uncomfortably. I don't know what you're talking about, Veronica attempted, but her voice betrayed her. Of course you do, Dominic replied. Every Tuesday and Thursday at the Meridian Hotel. Occasional meetings in restaurant bathrooms when the urge strikes. Like tonight, Vincent placed a tablet on the table, sliding it toward the center. On screen was a crystal-clear image of Veronica entering a service entrance of the restaurant, followed moments later by a handsome man in his early 40s. Leonard couldn't join us tonight, Dominic continued conversationally. He's currently having an interesting conversation with some associates of Vincent's. What have you done? Veronica whispered, real fear entering her eyes for the first time. Nothing compared to what all of you have done, Dominic replied, his mask of affability finally slipping to reveal something cold and unflinching beneath. But we're just getting started. He turned to Vincent. Shall we begin? Chapter 3. Initial Revelations. The private dining room had transformed into something resembling an interrogation chamber. Vincent's men had quietly secured the area, ensuring no interruptions. The restaurant staff, generously compensated in advance, maintained a respectful distance. This is ridiculous, Perry sputtered, attempting to stand. One of Vincent's men placed a firm hand on his shoulder, guiding him back into his seat. I recommend staying for the entire presentation, Vincent said, his tone pleasant, but leaving no room for argument. Dominic surveyed the table, Veronica frozen in shock, Skylar glancing frantically between her sister and the exits, Abbott slouched in drunken confusion, and Perry, his own brother, whose face had settled into a mask of calculated assessment. Perry, always looking for an angle. For those wondering about Vincent, Dominic began, he represents Sentinel Group. Never heard of it? That's by design. We provide specialized security and intelligence services to select clients globally. You expect us to believe you're some kind of spy? Skylar scoffed, though her voice lacked conviction. Nothing so dramatic, Dominic replied. Just a man with particular skills and connections that I've spent a decade concealing from all of you. Vincent tapped on the tablet, and new images appeared, financial statements, property deeds, and surveillance photos. 7 years ago, Dominic continued, when I discovered Veronica's affair, I had a choice. Confrontation or patience. I chose the latter, and I began building something while maintaining the appearance of failure. Veronica found her voice. Whatever you think you know about Leonard and me. December 14th, 2018, Dominic cut her off. The first time, the Meridian Hotel, room 712. You told me you were having dinner with clients. Leonard told his wife he was at a business conference in Chicago. Amateur mistakes. He turned to Perry. You've known about the affair for 5 years. In fact, you've been helping facilitate it, haven't you? Covering for Veronica when needed. Even lending your apartment twice when Leonard's wife became suspicious. Perry's face hardened, but he didn't deny it. And Skylar, Dominic continued, turning to his sister-in-law, you've been actively encouraging your sister to leave me. You've even introduced her to divorce attorneys. 3 by my count. You've been spying on all of us. Skylar demanded, indignation overriding her fear. I prefer to call it due diligence, Dominic replied. When surrounded by snakes, one keeps anti-venom handy. Vincent produced a folder and slid several documents across the table. Mr. Harlow has authorized me to distribute these as a preview of what's to come. Each person received a personalized dossier, thin but devastating in content. As they reluctantly reviewed the documents before them, faces paled and hands trembled. Veronica stared at evidence of her affair, dates, locations, photographs taken from a distance. There were also financial records showing how she had been siphoning money from their joint accounts into a personal fund Dominic wasn't supposed to know about. Perry's file contained details of his secret gambling debts and the money he had embezzled from his employer to cover them. Information that would destroy his career if revealed. Skylar found herself looking at proof of her tax evasion scheme for her boutique clothing business, along with evidence of prescription drug abuse she believed no one knew about. Even Abbott, the least culpable among them, received documentation of his drunken indiscretions at various business conventions. Indiscretions Skylar was unaware of. This is just the beginning, Dominic said quietly. A sample of what I've compiled over the years. What do you want? Veronica finally asked, her voice hollow. Tonight? Nothing. This is merely an announcement that the rules have changed. Dominic stood, straightening his tie. Vincent will fill you in on the details while I step out for some air. As he walked toward the door, Veronica called after him. Dom, please, we can talk about this. He turned back, studying his wife of 10 years with detached curiosity. There's nothing to discuss, Veronica. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. Outside, in the cool evening air, Dominic finally allowed himself a moment of genuine emotion. His hands shook slightly as he leaned against the restaurant wall. 10 years of marriage. 7 years of deception. 5 years of planning. His phone buzzed with a text for Vincent. Phase 1 complete. Ready for Phase 2 when you are. Dominic took a deep breath, steadying himself. The initial shock value had been delivered. Now the real work would begin. The systematic dismantling of those who had betrayed him, piece by careful piece. He texted back a single word. Proceed. Chapter 4. Calculated Moves. 3 days after the anniversary dinner, Dominic sat in a sleek office on the 30th floor of a downtown high-rise. The space belonged to Sentinel Group, though no signage or directory listing indicated its existence. The view overlooked the city where he had played the role of failure for so long. Vincent entered, accompanied by a woman Dominic knew as Naomi Frost. In her early 50s with steel-gray hair in a precise bob, Naomi had been Dominic's mentor when he first entered the security intelligence field 15 years ago. They're scrambling, Naomi reported, taking a seat across from him, each in their predictable ways. Dominic nodded. Details? Your wife contacted Leonard immediately after the dinner. They've met twice since then, panicking about exposure. Naomi slid a tablet across the desk, showing surveillance photos. She's also consulted with a divorce attorney, though not one of Skylar's recommendations. Smart move on her part. And my brother? Perry attempted to cover his embezzlement tracks. Vincent interjected. Clumsy work. He's also reached out to 3 of your former business associates, presumably looking for leverage. Skylar moved assets into offshore accounts and increased her prescription dosage, Naomi replied. Abbott's sleeping in the guest room after she received his file. Dominic absorbed this information, mentally plotting the next moves. The first phase had been the shock of revelation. The second would be more subtle, applying pressure in specific ways to each betrayer. And Leonard Russo? Dominic asked. Nervous, but arrogant, Vincent replied. He believes his position as regional director at Meridian Financial insulates him from serious consequences. He told Veronica, and I quote, "What's he going to do? He's a nobody." Dominic smiled thinly. Perfect. Let's proceed with Leonard first. The plan for Leonard Russo wasn't merely about punishing the man for sleeping with his wife. It was about demonstrating power, showing everyone involved that Dominic controlled the board. The Meridian financial audit? Naomi asked. Initiated tomorrow, Dominic confirmed. And make sure our friend in HR receives the anonymous tip about Leonard's pattern of pursuing subordinates. Leonard had no idea that Dominic had been accumulating evidence of his multiple workplace indiscretions for years, nor that Sentinel Group had recently acquired a significant but unpublicized stake in Meridian Financial's parent company. For Perry, Dominic continued, I want his employer to receive an anonymous but detailed accounting of the embezzlement, not from us, but routed through one of his gambling contacts. Make it look like the contact is trying to save himself. Vincent nodded, making notes. And for Skylar? Tax audit. Again, not traceable to us. Her offshore transfers last night triggered automated flags we've been carefully nurturing at the IRS. The 3 continued refining the orchestration of consequences. Dominic wasn't interested in crude revenge. He wanted precision, targeted pressure that would create maximum impact with minimal direct action on his part. What about Veronica? Naomi finally asked. Dominic paused, staring out at the city skyline. Despite everything, this part was still the most difficult. Nothing yet, he decided. She's last. I want her to watch everything unfold around her first. Later that evening, Dominic returned to the house he shared with Veronica. They had barely spoken since the anniversary dinner, moving around each other like ghosts. He found her in the kitchen, wine glass in hand, staring at nothing. "We need to talk," she said when he entered. "I disagree," Dominic replied, opening the refrigerator. "Dom, whatever you think happened with Leonard." "I don't think anything, Veronica." "I know." With precision. He closed the refrigerator, a bottled water in hand. 7 years, 43 hotel visits, 17 weekends when you were supposedly with Skylar. "I have the receipts, literally and figuratively." Her face crumbled. "Why didn't you just confront me when you found out? Why this elaborate scheme?" "Because you, your sister, and my brother made me into a joke," Dominic replied, his voice steady. "You all decided who I was without bothering to know the truth. So I let you believe what you wanted while I built something else." "And what exactly have you built?" she challenged. "This mysterious business with that terrifying man? Is it even legal?" Dominic laughed softly. "Sentinel Group is perfectly legitimate, Veronica. Specialized security consulting for high-net-worth clients and corporations. The company I quietly founded while you all mocked my failed ventures." "I don't believe you. Your belief is irrelevant. Facts remain facts." He moved toward the door, then paused. "By the way, Leonard's having a difficult day today. You might want to check on him." As if on cue, Veronica's phone chimed with a message. The color drained from her face as she read it. Dominic left her there, walking upstairs to the home office he rarely used. Inside, he unlocked a hidden panel in the bookshelf, revealing a secure terminal. Logging in, he reviewed the day's events. Leonard Russo had been called into a surprise meeting with Meridian Financial's board of directors regarding irregularities discovered during a routine audit. Simultaneously, 3 women from different departments had filed sexual harassment complaints against him, encouraged by an anonymous HR advocate. By close of business, Leonard had been suspended pending investigation. Dominic closed the terminal with satisfaction. The first domino had fallen exactly as planned. His phone buzzed with a text from Naomi. Perry's employer received the embezzlement evidence. Police involvement expected by morning. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The only variable was how his targets would react under pressure. Would they turn on each other, or would they attempt to unite against him? Either scenario had been anticipated and prepared for. Dominic lay in bed that night, listening to Veronica crying quietly in the guest room. The sound brought him no pleasure, but it no longer moved him to compassion either. She had made her choices over years, consistently and deliberately. Now she would face the consequences, just like the others. Tomorrow would bring the next phase, escalation. Chapter 5, Pressure Points. Leonard Russo paced his living room at 3 a.m., phone pressed to his ear. "You don't understand. They have everything. Account manipulations, client fund misappropriations I didn't even remember doing." On the other end, Veronica's voice was strained. "Leon, I can't talk now. Dom might be listening." "Of course he's listening," Leonard hissed. "That's the whole point. Your pathetic husband isn't what he seemed. He's destroying me." "I'll call you back," Veronica whispered before hanging up. Leonard threw his phone against the wall. In just 4 days, his life had imploded. Suspended from Meridian Financial, facing multiple harassment allegations, and now evidence of financial improprieties had emerged. His wife had taken the children to her mother's after the harassment stories leaked to local business publications. The doorbell rang, startling him. At this hour, he approached cautiously, checking the security camera feed on his phone. A woman he didn't recognize stood at the door in a business suit despite the late hour. Against his better judgment, he opened the door slightly, security chain engaged. "Mr. Russo?" Naomi Frost, representing Dominic Harlow. Leonard's face contorted with rage. "Get the hell off my property before I call the police." "The police are already quite interested in you, Mr. Russo, but I'm here to offer an alternative." Despite himself, Leonard hesitated, then unlatched the chain. Across town, Perry Harlow was being escorted from his apartment in handcuffs, neighbors watching from doorways. The evidence against him had been overwhelming and meticulously documented. Embezzlement systematically carried out over 3 years. As officers placed him in the police car, Perry spotted a familiar black SUV parked down the street. Though he couldn't see the occupants, he knew his brother was watching. Somehow, impossibly, Dominic had orchestrated all of this. Meanwhile, Skylar received an early morning visit from IRS investigators armed with specific information about her tax evasion scheme. They had documentation of every false deduction, every hidden income stream, every offshore transfer. As they cataloged financial records in her home office, Skylar's phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. This is only the beginning. DH. By noon, Dominic sat in Sentinel Group's conference room with Vincent and Naomi, reviewing the morning's developments. Leonard took the offer, Naomi reported. As expected, self-preservation trumped loyalty to Veronica. He'll provide detailed testimony about their relationship in exchange for our assistance with his legal troubles. And the documentation he signed? Dominic asked. Complete admission of guilt, both for the affair and his financial misconduct. Legally binding and witnessed. Vincent added, Perry's being processed now. Initial bail hearing tomorrow. His attorney is already floating the idea of a plea deal. Let him stew for a few days, Dominic instructed. No contact yet. Skylar's in full panic mode, Naomi continued. She's called Veronica 7 times since the IRS left. Abbott moved out this morning after she accused him of somehow causing their troubles. Dominic nodded, satisfied with the progress. And Veronica hasn't left the house. She's called her parents, Leonard, and 3 different attorneys. No one's taking her calls. That detail wasn't coincidental. Dominic had ensured that Veronica would find herself increasingly isolated. Her parents had received evidence of not only her affair, but also of disparaging comments she'd made about them in private conversations with Leonard. Every attorney she attempted to contact had been subtly warned away from representing her. It's time I had another conversation with my wife, Dominic decided. When he returned home that afternoon, he found Veronica in the living room, surrounded by papers and looking disheveled. What have you done? She demanded when he entered. Leonard's not answering my calls. Perry's been arrested. Skylar's being investigated by the IRS. My parents won't speak to me. I've done nothing, Dominic replied calmly. Each of them is simply facing the consequences of their own actions. This isn't right, she insisted. You can't just destroy people's lives because you're angry about. About what, Veronica? About being betrayed? About being mocked and ridiculed by my own family? About spending years as the butt of jokes while I worked to build something real? I want a divorce, she said flatly. Of course you do. But there's a problem. Dominic sat down across from her. You signed a post-nuptial agreement 3 years ago, remember? The one my incompetent lawyer friend drafted that you didn't bother reading carefully? Her face paled. What are you talking about? Section 12, paragraph 3. In case of infidelity, the unfaithful party forfeits all claims to marital assets and property. That's not enforceable, she protested weakly. It is when accompanied by documented evidence and witness testimony, like Leonard's signed affidavit from this morning. Veronica's hands began to shake. You planned all this for years. Who are you? I'm exactly who I've always been, Dominic replied, rising. You just never bothered to look beyond what you wanted to see. He left her there, surrounded by the scattered remnants of the life she thought she had. Phase 2 was proceeding perfectly. Isolation and pressure applied precisely where each target was most vulnerable. That evening, Dominic received a call from Vincent. We may have a complication, his partner said without preamble. Perry made his phone call from jail. He contacted Leonard's brother, Thomas Russo. Thomas Russo, Leonard's older brother and a man with connections to less legitimate business enterprises. A variable they'd anticipated but hoped to avoid. How serious? Dominic asked. Unclear yet. We're monitoring. But if Thomas gets involved, activate Contingency Protocol T, Dominic instructed, and increase surveillance on all primary targets. He ended the call, contemplating this development. The potential involvement of Thomas Russo would escalate matters significantly. While Leonard operated in the world of corporate finance, his brother moved in darker circles. If Perry had somehow convinced Thomas that helping Leonard would benefit him, Dominic accessed the secure terminal in his home office, reviewing the contingency plans for this exact scenario. Sentinel Group had compiled extensive intelligence on Thomas Russo as a precaution, including evidence of money laundering through a chain of restaurants he owned. If Thomas entered the game, Dominic was prepared to change the rules entirely. Chapter 6. Counter-moves. Thomas Russo was not a man accustomed to subtlety. 6'4" with the build of a former college linebacker gone slightly to seed, he entered Vincent's office without an appointment, brushing past the security desk with the confidence of someone rarely challenged. Vincent, expecting the visit, rose calmly from behind his desk. "Mr. Russo, I was wondering when you'd appear." "Where's Harlow?" Thomas demanded, his voice a controlled rumble. "Mr. Harlow is unavailable. But as his partner, I'm fully authorized to discuss any concerns you might have regarding your brother's situation." Thomas leaned forward, placing massive hands on Vincent's desk. "My brother says some nobody is systematically destroying his life. A nobody married to the woman he's been seeing. Now I find out this nobody is connected to Sentinel Group." He straightened up. "That's not very nobody at all, is it?" "Your assessment is accurate," Vincent replied, unfazed by the intimidation attempt. "Though I wonder why you've chosen to involve yourself in your brother's extramarital affairs." "Family is family," Thomas said flatly. "Leonard made a mistake. He'll end it with a woman. But his career, his reputation, that needs to be fixed." Interesting perspective. Your brother's years-long affair with a married woman is a mistake that can be remedied by simply ending it. Vincent opened a folder on his desk. "Would you characterize his financial improprieties at Meridian the same way? Or perhaps the sexual harassment of subordinates?" Thomas's expression darkened. "I don't care what he did. Fix it, or there will be consequences." "There already are consequences, Mr. Russo, for your brother, and potentially for you, should you continue on this path." Thomas laughed, a harsh sound. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "On the contrary." Vincent slid a document across the desk. "We know exactly who we're dealing with. Your restaurants in Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. Your connections to the Donovan Syndicate. The offshore accounts in the Caymans. Shall I continue?" The color drained from Thomas's face as he scanned the document. A detailed summary of his illicit business operations that not even his closest associates fully knew. Vincent continued calmly. "Mr. Harlow anticipated your involvement. He prepared for it. This meeting isn't a negotiation, Mr. Russo. It's a courtesy warning." "Tell Harlow this isn't over," Thomas growled, though with notably less conviction. "Actually, it is. Your brother signed a full confession this morning, accepting responsibility for his actions in exchange for certain assurances. He also agreed to cease all contact with Veronica Harlow." Vincent stood. "I suggest you focus your energies on insulating your own operations from the scrutiny that's about to fall on your family name." After Thomas Russo stormed out, Vincent called Dominic immediately. "The elder Russo has been neutralized," he reported, "though I expect he'll make at least one more attempt before accepting defeat." "Anticipated," Dominic replied. "Proceed with the Thomas contingency regardless. I want pressure from the Donovan angle by tomorrow." By midnight, Thomas Russo was dealing with his own crisis as federal authorities began investigating one of his restaurant suppliers, a front company for the Donovan Syndicate's money laundering operation. The timing wasn't coincidental. Sentinel Group had been sitting on this information, waiting for the precise moment to deploy it. Meanwhile, Perry Harlow sat in a holding cell, his bail hearing delayed due to administrative issues, another of Dominic's machinations. He'd had 3 days to contemplate his situation, watching as his carefully constructed life crumbled. His employer had fired him publicly, his girlfriend had abandoned him, and his assets had been frozen pending investigation. When the cell door opened and Dominic walked in, Perry wasn't entirely surprised. "Come to gloat?" he asked, not meeting his brother's eyes. "If I wanted to gloat, I wouldn't have come personally," Dominic replied, taking a seat on the bench beside him. "We're beyond that now. What do you want from me?" "Nothing. You've already given me exactly what I expected, betrayal." Dominic's voice remained calm, conversational. "You sided with them against me. Your own brother." Perry finally looked up, his face haggard from sleepless nights. "They had money, position, connections. What did you have? Failed businesses and excuses. And yet here we are, you in a cell, and me." Dominic gestured to his immaculate suit. Not quite the failure you imagined. So this is revenge. Destroy my life because I didn't believe in you. This isn't revenge, Perry. It's consequences. You stole from your company. You facilitated my wife's affair. You mocked me publicly and privately for years. Dominic stood. I simply removed my protection. Protection? What are you talking about? Did you ever wonder why your earlier indiscretions never came to light? The drunk driving incident in college that mysteriously disappeared from records? The plagiarism accusation that was suddenly dropped? Dominic moved toward the door. I've been cleaning up your messes our entire lives, Perry. I just stopped doing it. As Dominic signaled to the guard, Perry called after him. Don, wait. I can make this right. I can help you hurt Veronica, get evidence, whatever you need. Dominic turned back, studying his brother with something like pity. That's the difference between us, Perry. I don't need your help. I never did. Across town, Veronica sat in the darkened kitchen of the home she'd shared with Dominic for a decade, a home she now realized she knew very little about. She'd spent the day discovering hidden compartments, secure locks, and subtle security measures she'd never noticed. The house itself seemed to have been constructed as some kind of fortress disguised as an ordinary suburban residence. Her phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. Parking garage. Level B. Space 23. 20 minutes. Come alone. Tr. Thomas Russo, Leonard's brother. She met him only twice, finding him crude and intimidating. But he was offering contact when everyone else had abandoned her. 20 minutes later, she entered the deserted parking garage, her footsteps echoing in the concrete structure. The black SUV was parked exactly where promised, engine running. As she approached, the passenger window lowered. Get in, Thomas ordered. Veronica hesitated, suddenly aware of the foolishness of meeting a near stranger in an empty parking garage. I said get in, Thomas repeated, more forcefully. Before she could decide, a voice came from behind her. I wouldn't do that, Mrs. Harlow. Turning, she found Naomi Frost standing there, two men in suits flanking her. Thomas swore, starting to open his door. One of Naomi's men raised a hand, revealing a pistol. This isn't your world, Mr. Russo, Naomi called calmly. Drive away now, and we'll consider this unfortunate encounter finished. After a tense moment, Thomas's window raised, and the SUV squealed away, leaving Veronica standing between Naomi and her men. Your husband anticipated this, Naomi explained, guiding Veronica toward a waiting car. Thomas Russo intended to use you as leverage against Dominic. Why are you helping me? Veronica asked, bewildered. I'm not, Naomi replied simply. I'm following Dominic's instructions. He wasn't ready for you to be removed from the board just yet. As they drove her home, Veronica stared out the window, finally understanding the true scope of what she was facing. Dominic hadn't merely discovered her affair. He hadn't simply built a secret business. He had constructed an entire shadow life, while she believed him to be a failure. And now, piece by piece, he was dismantling everyone who had wronged him, with her as the final target. Chapter 7, Revelations. 1 week after the anniversary dinner, Dominic sat in the library of his childhood home in rural Massachusetts. The modest farmhouse had been the Harlow family for 3 generations, though Perry had always been embarrassed by its simplicity. Their parents, both deceased for over a decade, had raised them with middle-class values that Perry had eagerly discarded when given the opportunity. Vincent entered, removing his coat. Everything is proceeding as planned. Leonard Russo has been formally charged with financial misconduct at Meridian. His brother Thomas is facing federal investigation. Perry's legal situation continues to deteriorate, and Skylar's tax issues have expanded to include potential fraud charges. And Veronica? Increasingly isolated. Her attempt to access her joint accounts was blocked by the bank. Her parents have formally cut contact after receiving the complete dossier on her affair. She's made 3 attempts to contact Leonard, all rebuffed. Dominic nodded, staring into the fireplace. It's time for the final phase. The plan had always been methodical. First shock, then isolation, then pressure, and finally revelation. Each betrayer would learn not only the consequences of their actions, but also the full truth of who they had been dealing with all along. The Sentinel board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow, Vincent confirmed. All arrangements have been made, and our guests will receive their invitations within the hour. The following morning, Veronica found an elegant envelope slipped under the front door. Inside was an embossed invitation. Your presence is requested at the official unveiling of Sentinel Group Holdings. 11 a.m., Sentinel Tower, 30th floor. Transportation will arrive at 10:30 a.m. Attendance is mandatory. Dominic Harlow, Chief Executive Officer. Across the city, similar invitations were delivered to Perry's attorney, Schuyler and Abbott's home, and Leonard Russo's temporary apartment. At 11 a.m. precisely, they all sat in Sentinel Group's expansive boardroom, each looking diminished by recent events. Veronica, hollow-eyed and tense. Perry, unshaven and defeated in a suit provided by his attorney. Schuyler, her usual polished appearance undermined by nervous movements. Abbott, clearly uncomfortable and slightly drunk despite the early hour. And Leonard Russo, accompanied by his lawyer, his once confident demeanor replaced by barely controlled fear. The doors opened, and Dominic entered with Vincent and Naomi flanking him. He took his position at the head of the table, surveying those gathered. "Thank you for coming," he began, as if this were a normal business meeting, though coming implies choice, which you didn't have. So perhaps "thank you for your attendance" is more accurate. "What is this about, Dominic?" Veronica asked, her voice thin with strain. "This is about truth, Veronica. Something in short supply among everyone at this table." He gestured to a uniformed staff member who distributed folders to each person. "Inside you'll find a comprehensive summary of Sentinel Group Holdings, our structure, our operations, and most importantly, our assets." As they reluctantly opened the folders, expressions of disbelief spread across their faces. Sentinel Group is valued at approximately $2.7 billion. Dominic continued conversationally. "We provide specialized security and intelligence services to Fortune 500 companies, high-net-worth individuals, and select government contractors. I founded the company 7 years ago, shortly after discovering Veronica's affair with Leonard." He turned to his wife. "You wondered why I never confronted you. The truth is, your betrayal was the catalyst I needed. It freed me to return to the work I'd left behind when we married, work I excelled at. You expect us to believe you built a multi-billion-dollar company without anyone knowing?" Schuyler scoffed, though her voice lacked conviction. "Not without anyone knowing," Dominic corrected. "Without you knowing. A crucial distinction. Sentinel operates deliberately below the radar. Our clients value discretion above all else." He gestured to Vincent. "Vincent and I served together in private security operations before I met Veronica. Why I decided to rebuild that life. He was my first call." "Why bring us here now?" Perry's attorney asked. "What's the purpose of this meeting?" "Clarity," Dominic replied simply. "I wanted each of you to understand exactly who you've been dealing with and what's coming next." He pressed a button, and a screen descended from the ceiling, displaying a series of images and documents. "Veronica, you believed you were married to a failure. The truth is, everything you saw, every failed business, every financial setback, was carefully constructed. I needed to appear unsuccessful while building Sentinel without attracting attention." He turned to Leonard. "Mr. Russo, you thought you were sleeping with the wife of an insignificant man. In reality, you were creating a vulnerability in your life that I've systematically exploited." To Perry, "Brother, you chose status over loyalty. You aligned yourself with those who mocked me because it was easier than standing by family. That decision has cost you everything." And finally to Schuyler, "You judged me based on appearances, never bothering to look deeper. Your contempt revealed a fundamental character flaw that I've now used against you." Dominic stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "This meeting isn't about negotiation. It's about informing you that your lives, as you knew them, are over. Not because of what I've done, but because of what each of you did. I simply ensured that appropriate consequences followed." "You can't do this," Leonard protested weakly. It's persecution." "No, Mr. Russo, It's justice. Calculated, precise justice. Dominic moved toward the door. Vincent will explain the specific terms for each of you. I suggest you listen carefully. As Dominic left, Vincent took his place at the head of the table, opening his own folder. Mr. Russo, in exchange for your signed confession, certain financial charges against you will be dropped. However, the sexual harassment claims will proceed. Your position at Meridian is permanently terminated, and you will receive no severance or pension. Additionally, the non-disclosure agreement you signed prevents you from discussing any aspect of your relationship with Mrs. Harlow or face substantial financial penalties. Leonard slumped in his chair as Vincent continued. Perry Harlow, your embezzlement charges cannot be made to disappear entirely. However, in exchange for a guilty plea, you will serve a reduced sentence of 18 months in a minimum security facility. Upon release, you will be relocated to Arizona with a modest stipend. You will have no further contact with Dominic Harlow or anyone associated with him. Perry nodded numbly, already resigned to his fate. Skylar, your tax issues can be resolved with full repayment plus penalties. The alternative is criminal prosecution. Abbott, your position is less complicated. File for divorce or face public exposure of your indiscretions. The choice is yours. Finally, Vincent turned to Veronica. Mrs. Harlow, your situation is the most straightforward. The postnuptial agreement you signed is binding and will be enforced. You leave this marriage with nothing except a one-way ticket to wherever you choose to go. Your remaining personal effects have been packed and delivered to a storage facility. Access information is in your folder. Veronica stared at him in disbelief. He's throwing me out with nothing? After 10 years. On the contrary, Vincent replied coolly, he's allowing you to leave with exactly what you deserve. The house, the cars, the accounts, all assets of Signal Group, temporarily made available to Dominic's struggling public persona. They were never truly yours to claim. As the meeting concluded and each person was escorted out separately, Veronica remained seated, staring at the folder before her. He planned this for years, she said softly. While you were destroying your marriage. Yes, Naomi finished for her, having remained silent until now. Dominic gave you 10 years of his life, Veronica. You gave him motivation to become what he always was, exceptional. I want to speak to him, Veronica insisted. One last time. Naomi considered this, then nodded. He anticipated that request. He's waiting in his office. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. Dominic's office occupied the corner of Sentinel Tower's 30th floor, offering panoramic views of the city below. When Veronica entered, he stood with his back to the door, gazing out at the skyline. Did you ever love me at all? She asked without preamble. He turned slowly, studying her face. 10 years of marriage, and now they were effectively strangers. Yes, he answered simply. Completely. That's why your betrayal cut so deeply. Then why all this? She gestured around them. Why the elaborate deception? The revenge plot? If you loved me, why not just confront me when you found out about Leonard? Because by then, it wasn't just about the affair. Dominic moved to his desk, leaning against it. It was about how you saw me, how you spoke about me to your family, to your friends, how you laughed when they mocked me. The affair was a symptom, not the disease. Veronica sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. And what was the disease, Dom? Contempt, he replied without hesitation. You held me in contempt. You all did. My failure to meet your material expectations translated into a deeper judgment of my worth as a person. So this was all about wounded pride? Proving you were better than we thought? No, this was about consequences. Dominic's voice remained calm, but his eyes had hardened. You chose to betray our vows. Perry chose to betray brotherhood. Skylar chose to fuel your discontent. Leonard chose to pursue a married woman. Each of you made choices repeatedly over years. Now you face the results of those choices. Veronica looked up at him, tears forming. I made mistakes, terrible ones, but this level of retribution isn't retribution, Dominic finished. It's calculation. Each of you receives exactly what your actions warranted. No more, no less. "You've changed," she whispered. "The Dominic I married would never be this cold, this unforgiving. The Dominic you married was a fiction, a version of myself I created because I believed that's what you wanted. A normal man with normal ambitions." He straightened, adjusting his tie. "My mistake was thinking I could be less than I am for someone else's comfort. And who are you really, Dom? Some kind of corporate spy? A manipulator who builds elaborate revenge scenarios?" "I'm someone who values loyalty above all else," he replied. "Someone who gives exactly what he receives. You gave me betrayal, so that's what you get in return." Veronica stood, gathering what dignity she could. "You won't even consider forgiveness? After 10 years together, 7 of which you spent sleeping with another man." Dominic shook his head. "Forgiveness requires repentance, Veronica. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you were caught and are facing consequences." He moved to the door, opening it to reveal Naomi waiting outside. "Your flight to Miami leaves at 7 p.m. I suggest you don't miss it." "This isn't over, Dom," Veronica said, her voice finding some of its old strength. "People don't just disappear from each other's lives after a decade together. Actually, they do. Quite easily, in fact." Dominic met her gaze one final time. "Goodbye, Veronica." After she was escorted out, Vincent entered the office, finding Dominic staring once again at the cityscape. "Phase complete," Vincent reported. "Perry's attorney has accepted the plea deal. Leonard has signed all required documents. Skylar has initiated payment of her tax penalties. And Thomas Russo, backing away completely. The Donovan investigation has him fully occupied." Dominic nodded, satisfaction evident but subdued. The plan had been executed flawlessly, each betrayer now facing a future irreversibly altered by their own actions and his calculated response. "What's next?" Vincent asked. "For them? Exactly what we've outlined. For us." Dominic turned from the window. "Sentinel has a new defense contract to fulfill. I suggest we focus on that." Later that evening, as Veronica's plane took off for Miami and a future stripped of the wealth and status she had valued so highly, Dominic returned to the house they had shared. He walked through the empty rooms, memories surfacing and being systematically filed away. In the master bedroom, he opened a hidden safe behind a seemingly solid wall panel, removing a small velvet box. Inside was Veronica's engagement ring, not the one she wore, but the original one he had planned to give her. A simple diamond that represented the man he'd truly been, not the wealthier persona he'd adopted to win her. He snapped the box shut, returning it to the safe. Some memories needed to be preserved, if only as reminders of lessons learned. His phone buzzed with a message from Vincent. Perry transferred to custody. Veronica landed in Miami. Leonard's termination finalized. Skylar's first payment processed. Dominic replied with a single word, complete. The game was finished. Each player had received exactly what they'd earned. The man they'd all dismissed and mocked had revealed himself to be the architect of their downfall, using their own weaknesses against them with surgical precision. As he left the house for the final time, it would be sold next week. Dominic reflected on the journey from betrayed husband to avenging force. The satisfaction wasn't in the punishment itself, but in the restoration of balance. Actions had consequences. Loyalty mattered. Truth eventually emerged. And a man underestimated was the most dangerous opponent of all. Chapter 9. Aftermath. 6 months later, Dominic stood on the observation deck of Sentinel Tower, watching as winter gave way to early spring across the city. The company had expanded again, acquiring 3 smaller security firms and establishing a foothold in European markets. Vincent joined him, handing over a leather portfolio. The final reports, as requested. Inside were updates on each person from Dominic's previous life, detailed with Sentinel's characteristic thoroughness. Perry was 4 months into his 18-month sentence at a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. He'd started writing a memoir, apparently believing his story of rise and fall would interest publishers. Prison officials reported he was a model inmate, participating in educational programs and counseling sessions. Leonard Russo had relocated to Chicago, taking a significantly reduced position at a small investment firm. The sexual harassment claims had been settled out of court, but his reputation in the financial sector was irreparably damaged. His wife had filed for divorce, gaining primary custody of their children. Skylar had sold her boutique clothing business to pay her tax penalties, moving to a smaller house in a less prestigious neighborhood. Abbott had indeed filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She had reduced her prescription medication usage and was attending support group meetings. In Veronica, Dominic paused on her section of the report. She had remained in Miami, finding work as a marketing consultant for small businesses. Her lifestyle was modest compared to what she'd been accustomed to during their marriage. Recent surveillance photos showed her looking thinner but surprisingly centered, as if the removal of wealth had somehow clarified something essential in her. She contacted Naomi last week, Vincent mentioned, requested a meeting with you. Denied, I assume. Of course. Though she was persistent, claiming to have important information, Dominic closed the portfolio. The past is settled, Vincent. There's nothing she could tell me that would matter now. Yet as he said it, Dominic felt a flicker of curiosity. 6 months of executing his carefully constructed revenge had left him with exactly what he'd planned for: complete separation from his former life and those who had betrayed him. So why did Veronica's attempt at contact create even the slightest ripple in his certainty? Should we maintain surveillance? Vincent asked. Dominic considered this, then shook his head. No. Terminate all monitoring operations. They no longer warrant our attention. Later that evening, Dominic sat in his new penthouse apartment, reviewing acquisition documents for Sentinel's next expansion. The space was minimalist and modern, deliberately unlike the suburban home he'd shared with Veronica. No traces of that life remained except in his memory. His secure phone, used only for Sentinel's most sensitive communications, chimed with a message from an unknown number. I know about Sarajevo. We need to talk. V. Dominic stared at the screen, a chill running through him. Sarajevo, a mission from his previous life, before Veronica, before Sentinel. A mission that only 3 people in the world knew about: himself, Vincent, and Naomi. Or so he had believed. He called Vincent immediately. Veronica somehow knows about Sarajevo. How is that possible? It's not, Vincent replied, confusion evident in his voice. Those records were buried so deep that even our own systems don't contain references. Yet she just messaged me about it specifically. Dominic moved to his secure terminal, initiating encryption protocols. I need everything we have on her activities for the past 6 months. Someone has been feeding her information. Within an hour, Dominic had his answer, and it was more disturbing than he'd anticipated. Veronica had made contact with someone from his distant past, a former colleague named Maxwell Grant. Grant had worked with Dominic and Vincent on several high-risk operations, including Sarajevo, before disappearing after a mission went wrong. I thought Grant was dead, Dominic said when Vincent arrived at the penthouse with additional files. So did I, Vincent admitted. The Belgrade operation was a disaster. No bodies were recovered, but the explosion, no one could have survived that. Apparently someone did. Dominic studied the surveillance photos, showing Veronica meeting with a man whose face was partially obscured, but whose build and movement pattern matched Grant's. The question is why he's surfaced now, and why he's approached Veronica specifically. The answer became clear as they dug deeper. Grant hadn't just survived Belgrade. He had rebuilt himself with a new identity, amassing resources and connections while harboring a grudge against those he believed had abandoned him. And Dominic's very public takedown of his wife and her conspirators had put him back on Grant's radar. He's using Veronica as bait, Vincent concluded. He knows your pattern now, how thoroughly you dismantle those who betray you. He's counting on you seeing Veronica as a renewed threat. And what? Walking into a trap? Dominic shook his head. Grant knows me better than that. Unless that's precisely why he's doing it this way, Naomi suggested, joining them after being called in. He knows you'll analyze and counter any direct approach. So he's created a scenario unusual enough to pique your curiosity, but not threatening enough to trigger full defensive protocols. Dominic considered this, the tactical implications unfolding in his mind. If Grant had survived Belgrade, if he blamed Dominic and Vincent for the operation's failure, And if he had been watching from the shadows all these years, then the game Dominic thought was complete had merely entered a new phase. We need to move first, he decided. Not against Veronica. She's just a pawn. Against Grant directly. The next 72 hours were a blur of intense activity as Sentinel's resources were mobilized to locate and neutralize the threat Grant represented. The operation required precision timing and coordination across multiple teams, drawing on the full scope of Dominic's strategic capabilities. By the third day, they had tracked Grant to an abandoned industrial complex outside the city. Satellite imagery showed minimal security but strategic placement of surveillance equipment, a setup designed to detect conventional approach patterns. He's expecting a team, Dominic observed, studying the tactical display. Standard infiltration protocols would trigger his countermeasures. So we don't use standard protocols, Vincent concluded. The plan they developed was audacious and high-risk. Dominic would approach alone, apparently responding to Veronica's message, while Sentinel teams positioned themselves covertly using routes and methods that circumvented Grant's detection systems. As night fell, Dominic stood at the entrance to the complex, seemingly exposed and vulnerable. His earpiece carried Vincent's voice, teams in position. Proceed with caution. The interior was dimly lit, machinery shadows creating a maze of potential hiding places. Dominic moved forward deliberately, scanning for trip wires or pressure plates. Grant's preferred methods from their shared past. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. A voice echoed through the space. Grant stepped from behind a concrete pillar, looking remarkably unchanged despite the years. His face carried new scars, but his eyes held the same calculating intelligence. You went to considerable trouble to get my attention, Dominic replied, stopping at a measured distance. Using Veronica was creative, I'll admit. Grant smiled thinly. She was surprisingly eager to help once I explained who I was. Your ex-wife harbors significant resentment, Dominic, though I suppose that's to be expected given how thoroughly you destroyed her life. Where is she now? Safe. Unlike us in Belgrade. Grant's smile faded. You left me there, Dom. In that burning hellhole. Left me to die while you and Vincent extracted with the asset. We searched for you, Dominic countered. For 3 days after the explosion. There was no sign, because I was being held and interrogated by very dedicated individuals who wanted to know exactly who had breached their facility. Grant moved forward slightly. 6 months of questions, Dom, followed by years of rebuilding, watching, waiting for the right moment. Dominic maintained his position, aware of the tactical disadvantages of the space. And you think this is that moment? Luring me here with vague threats and references to the past. No, this isn't about luring you anywhere. It's about showing you something. Grant gestured to a laptop set up on a nearby surface. The screen showed a live feed of a familiar setting, Dominic's childhood home in Massachusetts, now occupied by a young family who had purchased it after his parents' deaths. Sentiment was always your weakness, Grant continued. You keep everything at arm's length except the few connections that matter. Your precious little farmhouse. The place where the Harlow brothers grew up. Dominic watched as the image zoomed out, revealing small devices placed strategically around the property's perimeter. Explosives, Grant explained unnecessarily. Remote triggered. An innocent family erased along with the last physical connection to your past. Unless what, Max? What exactly do you want from me? Acknowledgement. Compensation. A reckoning. Grant's voice hardened. You built Sentinel on the foundations of operations like Belgrade and Sarajevo. Operations where people like me did the dying, while people like you did the profiting. Sentinel was built long after I left that world, Dominic countered. You're connecting unrelated events to justify your vendetta. Am I? The same tactical precision you used to dismantle your wife's life is exactly what you employed in the field. The same calculated patience. The same ruthlessness. Grant moved closer still. You haven't changed, Dom. You just found a more lucrative application for your particular skills. Throughout the conversation, Dominic had been subtly guiding Grant's movement, positioning them both where the Sentinel teams would have optimal angles if intervention became necessary. Now, he needed to keep Grant talking while the family at the farmhouse was quietly evacuated by a secondary team dispatched at the first sight of the explosive devices. "What happened to you in Belgrade was a tragedy," Dominic said, allowing genuine regret to enter his voice. "One I've carried with me. But this, threatening innocent people, using Veronica as a pawn, this puts you beyond redemption, Max." "Redemption?" Grant laughed bitterly. "That's rich coming from the man who spent years orchestrating the total destruction of everyone who wronged him. Your wife, her lover, your own brother, all methodically ruined because they didn't appreciate the real Dominic Harlow." "There's a difference between consequences and cruelty," Dominic replied. "I gave each of them exactly what their actions merited. No collateral damage. No innocent victims." As he spoke, Dominic received the signal through his earpiece. The family had been safely removed from the farmhouse. Sentinel teams were in final position around the complex. "You still don't get it," Grant said, shaking his head. "This isn't about what's fair or justified. It's about pain. The pain you escaped by leaving me behind. The pain I've carried every day since." He reached into his jacket, producing a detonator. "Some debts can only be paid one way." "I wouldn't," Dominic warned, tensing slightly. "Why not? Because your teams are in position? Because you've already evacuated the family? I know how you operate, Dom. I helped write the playbook." Grant smiled sadly. This was never about succeeding. It was about making sure you understood something fundamental. "And what's that?" "That your perfect revenge story isn't over. That for all your calculation and precision, you missed a variable. And that error will cost you." Grant's thumb hovered over the detonator. "Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But someday, when you least expect it, the bill comes due." In the split second before Grant could press the button, a single shot rang out. Grant's expression registered surprise as he crumpled to the floor, the detonator falling from his grasp. Vincent stepped from the shadows, lowering his weapon. "Some variables can be eliminated," he said quietly. Dominic knelt beside Grant, checking for a pulse and finding none. The man who had once been his colleague, who had survived against impossible odds only to be consumed by vengeance, was gone. "Sweep the area," Dominic instructed the teams, now moving into the complex. "And locate Veronica." Grant implied she's being held somewhere. Within an hour, they had found her, not captive as implied, but staying voluntarily in a motel 20 miles outside the city. When Sentinel operatives brought her to the complex, her expression showed not fear, but disappointment. "He said you'd come yourself," she told Dominic. "He said you wouldn't be able to resist the mystery. Did you know what he was planning? The family he threatened?" Veronica looked genuinely shocked. "What? No. He just said he knew you from before, that he could help me get some kind of settlement from you. Something I deserved after what you did." Dominic studied his ex-wife, seeing the truth in her response. She had been a tool, nothing more, a way for Grant to create an emotional connection that might cloud Dominic's judgment. "You should return to Miami," he said finally. "There's nothing for you here. That's it? After everything that happened, you're just dismissing me?" Anger flashed in her eyes. "You destroy my life, then act like I'm nothing? You destroyed your own life, Veronica, with choices made consistently over years." Dominic turned to leave. "Grant is dead. Whatever he promised you died with him. This chapter is closed." As she was escorted away, Veronica called after him. "You think you've won, Dom? That your perfect revenge is complete. But look at you, alone, suspicious, incapable of forgiveness or genuine connection. You've become exactly what you always were beneath the surface." Her words followed him as he returned to the command vehicle where Vincent waited. "She's not entirely wrong," Vincent observed quietly. "Grant found a vulnerability because it exists. Every security system has potential breach points," Dominic replied. "What matters is how quickly they're identified and neutralized. And the farmhouse? Secure the property. Compensate the family generously for the disruption. Triple our monitoring protocols." Dominic's voice betrayed no emotion. No more sentimentality. No more connections to the past. Later that night, as reports confirmed that all Grant's explosives had been neutralized and his limited network of associates identified for monitoring. Dominic stood in his penthouse, gazing out at the city lights. The revenge he had so meticulously planned and executed had been complete. Each betrayer had received exactly what they deserved. Yet Grant's emergence from the past and Veronica's parting words lingered in his thoughts. Had his pursuit of justice, his insistence on consequences for betrayal, transformed him into something colder, more isolated than he'd intended? He dismissed the thought. Sentiment was indeed a vulnerability, as Grant had correctly identified. In a world where loyalty was rare and betrayal common, the capacity to execute consequences without hesitation was not a flaw, but a strength. Dominic Harlow had built something remarkable from the ashes of betrayal. He had revealed his true nature not just to those who had underestimated him, but to himself. The mask of ordinary man had been necessary once, a compromise made for love. But that compromise had nearly destroyed him. Never again would he diminish himself for another's comfort. Never again would he forgive betrayal or trust blindly. And never again would he allow sentiment